The night before my 24th birthday, Ethan Miller came home from an 8-hour shift at a hardware store carrying a $6 chocolate cake from the grocery store bakery. The blue frosting on top had already started to smear under the plastic lid, but he still held it carefully as if it were something valuable. It was not fancy. It was not homemade. But it was his birthday cake, and in a family where he had spent most of his life being ignored, even a cheap cake felt like proof that he still mattered. When he stepped into the house, he immediately knew something was wrong. His mother, Linda, sat in her favorite armchair, with her hands folded in her lap. His father, Carl, sat on the edge of the couch, staring down at the carpet. His younger sister, Brooke, was curled beneath a blanket with red eyes and a trembling mouth, looking exactly like someone who wanted the room to believe she had been crying for hours. It looked less like a family waiting for him, and more like a meeting where the decision had already been made before he arrived. Linda looked at the cake in his hands and sighed softly. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said. Her voice had that gentle tone she used whenever she was about to take something away from him and pretend it was for the good of the family. Ethan did not answer. He simply stood near the doorway, still in his work boots, still smelling like sawdust and metal shelves, waiting for the familiar disappointment to land. His mother explained that there would be no birthday dinner the next day. No pizza, no cake, no small family celebration. Brooke had been feeling overlooked lately, Linda said, and the family needed to give her their full attention. Birthdays came every year, but Brooke's emotional well-being was fragile. The evening would be spent talking about Brooke's feelings, Brooke's future, and how everyone could support Brooke better. For a moment, Ethan just stared at her. Brooke's face was on nearly every wall in that house. Her childhood pageant photos filled the hallway. Her trophies crowded the shelves. Her dance costumes had once taken over the guest room, then half the garage, and eventually the bigger bedroom that Ethan had been asked to give up because Brooke needed room for her dreams. Yet somehow, Brooke was the one who felt invisible. Ethan had been invisible for years. When he brought home straight-A report cards, his parents nodded and went back to discussing Brooke's next competition. When he got accepted into a business program at the local state college, they told him money was tight. When Brooke wanted private coaching, new dresses, and weekend hotel stays for pageants, money somehow appeared. Carl worked overtime at the auto parts plant until his face looked permanently exhausted, and Linda called it sacrifice. Ethan called it worship. The only person who ever saw the truth was Ethan's grandfather, Samuel. He lived across town in a small blue house with a sagging porch and an old pickup truck that coughed every time it started. Linda did not like him because he refused to help pay for Brooke's pageant life. Samuel had once told her that raising a child to need applause was not love. After that, Linda called him bitter. Ethan called him honest. Samuel was the one who asked Ethan about school. Samuel remembered his favorite books. Samuel listened when Ethan talked about wanting to study business and maybe one day buy old houses, fix them, and rent them out. He never laughed at the dream. He only said a man who learns how to fix broken things can build himself a good life. Ethan carried those words with him, especially on nights when his own home felt less like a home and more like a place where he was allowed to sleep as long as he caused no trouble. But what made that birthday night different was not just the canceled dinner. 3 hours earlier, Ethan had come home between work and class to grab a textbook. Nobody knew he was in the house. As he passed Brooke's bedroom, he heard her laughing on the phone. Her door was cracked open, and her voice had that sweet, fake tone she used when she was enjoying a lie. She told her friend she had convinced their mother that Ethan's birthday was making her feel ignored. She laughed about how easy it had been. Then she said the real reason she needed attention was because her college dismissal letter would arrive any day. She had failed the semester after skipping classes for weeks. If she acted emotionally overwhelmed now, she could blame the family for putting too much pressure on her instead of admitting she had wasted thousands of dollars. Ethan had stood frozen in the hallway, one hand gripping his backpack strap. His parents had told him they could not help with his tuition, but they had spent a fortune sending Brooke to college. Now she had thrown it away, and planned to use his birthday as a shield before the truth came out. So, when Linda sat there that night explaining why Brooke needed his birthday more than he did something inside, Ethan finally went quiet. Not angry, not broken, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when a person stops hoping. He set the cake on the coffee table. Brooke watched him carefully, probably waiting for him to argue so she could cry harder. Linda waited for him to be mature. Carl kept looking at the floor. Ethan looked at his father one last time, hoping for even one word, one small defense, one sign that Carl remembered he had a son too. Nothing came. So Ethan turned away, walked down the hall, entered his room, and closed the door behind him. They probably thought he was going to sulk like he had done so many times before. They had no idea he was pulling 2 duffel bags from the closet and packing everything he owned. By sunrise, Ethan Miller would no longer live in that house. Ethan packed in silence, moving through his room with the calm focus of someone who had already cried enough in life and had nothing left to prove. He opened drawers, folded clothes, gathered his birth certificate, social security card, school papers, bank statements, and the small envelope of cash he kept hidden inside an old shoebox. There was not much. A few pairs of jeans work shirts, 2 hoodies, his laptop with the cracked corner, and a stack of notebooks filled with business ideas he had written during lunch breaks at the hardware store. 24 years of living in that house fit into 2 duffel bags and 1 backpack. That fact hurt more than he expected. Outside his bedroom door, the house stayed quiet. No one came after him. No one knocked. No one asked if he was okay. In the living room, they were probably still comforting Brooke, praising her for being brave enough to share her feelings, while the birthday cake sat untouched on the coffee table like a joke nobody wanted to admit was cruel. Ethan paused once, looking around the room where he had spent most of his childhood. The walls were plain because he had never been allowed to paint them. The furniture was mismatched because Brooke always needed the better things. Even his bedroom felt borrowed, like he had only been a guest in his own life. Close to midnight, there was finally a soft knock. Ethan opened the door and found his father standing in the hallway. Carl looked older than 50, with tired eyes and shoulders that seemed permanently bent under the weight of choices he had refused to make. For one dangerous second, Ethan hoped his father had come to stop him. Not with force, but with love, with an apology, with one sentence that proved he understood what was happening. Instead, Carl reached into his wallet and pulled out several folded bills. "I don't have much," he said quietly. "It's $500. Take it." Ethan looked at the money, then at his father's face. "So, you know I'm leaving." Carl swallowed. "I figured. And that's all you have to say." His father's eyes flickered with shame. "I know things haven't been fair." Ethan almost laughed, but the sound never made it out. Haven't been fair. That was such a small way to describe a lifetime of being pushed aside. A school award missed because Brooke had rehearsal. A bedroom lost because Brooke needed costume racks. A college dream delayed because Brooke needed tuition coaching, gas money, hotel rooms, and another chance. Carl rubbed a hand over his face. "I failed you," he whispered. "I know that. I just don't know how to fix this family anymore." Ethan took the money because pride would not pay for gas, food, or books. But he did not thank his father right away. He studied him for a long moment and realized something that made the pain colder. Carl was not confused. He was not blind. He had seen everything. He had simply chosen silence, because silence was easier than standing between Linda and the truth. "Where will you go?" Carl asked. Ethan zipped his bag. "Does it matter?" The question hit harder than Ethan expected. Carl's face tightened, but he did not argue. He only nodded, stepped back, and let his son close the door. At 2 a.m, Ethan carried his bags out through the side entrance. The house was dark. The air was cold enough to bite at his hands as he loaded everything into his old Honda Civic, a car with nearly 200,000 miles and a heater that worked only when it felt like it. He sat behind the wheel for a moment, looking at the front windows of the house. He waited for guilt to come. It did not. He waited for fear. That came, but it was smaller than he expected. What he felt most was relief. He drove across town to Grandpa Samuel's house. The streets were empty, except for a few porch lights, and the glow of an all-night gas station near the highway. When he pulled into Samuel's driveway, the old pickup truck was parked crooked near the garage, just like always. Ethan knocked once, then twice. After a minute, the porch light came on. Samuel opened the door in a robe, his gray hair messy, his eyes sharp, even half asleep. He looked at Ethan's bags. Then he looked at Ethan's face. He did not ask what happened. He simply opened the door wider. "Well," Samuel said dryly, "I'm guessing the birthday party was a disaster." That almost broke Ethan. Not because it was funny, though it was, but because Samuel understood without needing a speech. Inside the little house smelled like coffee, old books, and the wood polish Samuel used on his kitchen table. He made hot chocolate, even though it was the middle of the night, then sat across from Ethan and listened while he told him everything. The overheard phone call, the canceled dinner, Brooke's lie, Linda's speech, Carl's $500. Samuel did not interrupt. His jaw tightened a few times and his hand closed around his mug so hard Ethan thought it might crack, but he let Ethan finish. When the story was done, Samuel leaned back and breathed out slowly. "You can stay here," he said. "No rent. No guilt. No conditions except one." Ethan looked up. "You finish school," Samuel said. "You build the life you kept talking about. You don't waste your freedom looking backward at people who refuse to see you." Ethan nodded, but his throat was too tight to answer. Samuel stood and pointed toward the small spare room at the end of the hallway. "That room is yours now. It's not fancy, but it's clean. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest." For the first time all night, Ethan felt something close to safety. 2 weeks later, Brooke's college dismissal letter arrived at his parents' house. Ethan knew because his phone exploded with calls from his mother. 17 missed calls in one afternoon. Then the voicemails started. At first, Linda sounded angry. She said Ethan had abandoned the family during a crisis. Then she sounded hurt. She said Brooke needed her brother. Then she sounded desperate. She said they had to present a united front because people in town might find out what had happened. Ethan deleted every message. He did not block the number yet. Some part of him wanted proof that they were finally feeling the weight of their own choices. But he never answered. Through Samuel, who still spoke to Carl once in a while, Ethan learned the truth. Brooke had failed every class, not because of stress, not because of depression, not because Ethan's birthday had made her feel overlooked, but because she had stopped attending lectures almost completely. The tuition money was gone. The excuses were collapsing. And for the first time, Ethan was not there to absorb the blame. That was when his real life began. He kept working at the hardware store, enrolled in extra classes, and slept in Samuel's spare room under a faded quilt that smelled faintly of cedar. Every morning, he woke up early and reminded himself of one thing: leaving had not destroyed his future. Leaving had saved it. Ethan's new life did not look dramatic from the outside. There was no sudden success, no perfect job waiting for him, no magical fresh start that erased years of being ignored. Most mornings began before sunrise in Grandpa Samuel's small kitchen with black coffee, cold toast, and a notebook full of numbers. Ethan worked the opening shift at the hardware store, went to class in the afternoon or evening, then came home to study until his eyes burned. Some nights, he fell asleep at the kitchen table, with a textbook open beneath his arm. But there was one difference that changed everything. For the first time in his life, the effort was for him. At his parents' house, working hard had meant proving he deserved space. At Samuel's house, working hard meant building a future. Samuel never made him feel guilty for being tired. He never compared him to Brooke. He never acted like Ethan's needs were an inconvenience. If Ethan came home late, Samuel left soup in the fridge. If Ethan talked about business ideas, Samuel listened. Sometimes he would sit beside him at the kitchen table and explain what he knew about old houses' repair costs. property taxes, and the quiet money people could make if they were patient enough to learn. Years earlier, Samuel had bought and fixed a few small houses before selling them. He was not rich, but he understood value. He taught Ethan how to look past peeling paint and ugly carpet. He taught him that bad lighting could make a good room seem worthless, that a neglected yard could scare away buyers, and that most people ran from repairs because they did not know how to measure the real cost. "A problem is only scary when you don't know its price," Samuel would say. Ethan wrote everything down. He finished his business degree faster than expected by taking summer classes and extra credits. He kept his grades high not because anyone was watching, but because he finally cared about the direction his own life was taking. Samuel had quietly saved a small college fund for him over the years, just enough to cover part of his tuition and keep him from drowning in debt. When Ethan found out, he had to leave the room for a minute because he did not want Samuel to see him cry. Meanwhile, his old family was unraveling. Without Ethan in the house, there was no quiet son to absorb the tension. Brooke's college failure became impossible to hide. Linda tried to defend her at first, blaming stress, pressure, loneliness, even Ethan's absence. But the college records told a simpler story. Brooke had skipped classes, missed assignments, ignored warnings, and failed every course. The money was gone. The dream Linda had bragged about at church, at the grocery store, and to every neighbor willing to listen, had collapsed into a stack of unpaid bills and embarrassment. Ethan heard pieces of it through Samuel, who still spoke to Carl now and then. Carl's overtime had been cut at the plant. Linda was furious all the time. Brooke cried when confronted, then shouted when crying stopped working. Everyone blamed everyone else. For the first time, Ethan was not there to be the responsible one, the easy target the child expected to forgive and understand while everyone else made a mess. Linda called often. At first, she left angry messages about betrayal. Then came messages about family unity. Then messages about how Brooke needed him. Finally, the messages became soft and wounded, full of phrases like, "After everything we did for you, and a mother should not have to beg her own son to come home." Ethan deleted them all. He did not feel powerful doing it. He felt tired. But each deleted message felt like closing a door that should have been closed years ago. After graduation, Samuel gave him a card and a check for $1,000. Ethan tried to refuse it, but Samuel pushed it back across the table. "This is not a gift," he said. "It's seed money. Go plant it somewhere useful." That summer, Ethan found his first real chance. A small 3-bedroom house on the edge of town had gone into foreclosure. It had been empty for months. The grass was high, the paint was faded, and the inside looked like someone had started renovating, lost hope, and walked away. Most buyers saw damage. Ethan saw numbers. He spent a week researching the neighborhood. He checked recent sales, estimated repair costs, studied rental prices, and built a budget so detailed that the loan officer at the bank raised his eyebrows when Ethan placed it on the desk. Ethan used Samuel's $1,000, every dollar he had saved, and a small business loan secured by the property itself. It was risky, but it was not reckless. He had measured the problem. He knew its price. The next 6 months were brutal. Ethan worked at the hardware store during the day, then drove straight to the house and worked until midnight. He ripped out stained carpet and found oak floors underneath. He learned how to patch drywall, replace light fixtures, install faucets, paint clean lines, and repair cabinets. He made mistakes constantly. The first faucet leaked for 2 days. The first ceiling fan wobbled so badly he had to take it down and start over. But every mistake taught him something. Samuel helped when his knees allowed it. Sometimes he mostly sat on a folding chair in the corner, giving instructions and pretending he was not proud. Other times he brought sandwiches and coffee, reminding Ethan to eat. The house slowly changed. The rooms brightened. The floors shined. The yard looked alive again. What had once felt abandoned began to feel like a home. When the renovation was finished, the appraisal came back far higher than Ethan had expected. He had created real equity with his hands, his research, and his stubborn refusal to quit. He rented the house to a young married couple, both elementary school teachers, who wrote him a thank you note after moving in, because the place was clean, safe, and affordable. That note meant almost as much as the rent check. The rent covered the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and maintenance, with a little left over each month. It was not enough to make him rich, but it proved the system worked. Buy carefully, fix honestly, rent fairly, save the difference. Repeat. For the first time, Ethan understood what Samuel had meant. A man who learns how to fix broken things can build himself a good life. And Ethan had only just begun. The second property came less than a year later. It was a tired little duplex on a street most investors ignored, because the neighborhood looked rough from the outside. But Ethan had learned not to judge a property by fear. He looked at numbers, structure, traffic schools, and whether people actually wanted to live nearby. The duplex needed paint, flooring, plumbing repairs, and a serious cleanup. But the roof was solid. The foundation was sound, and the rent potential was better than anyone expected. To Ethan, it looked like another broken thing waiting for someone patient enough to fix it. This time, the work moved faster. He knew which mistakes to avoid. He knew when to do a repair himself and when to call a licensed contractor. He knew how to talk to inspectors without sounding defensive. By the end of that renovation, he could patch drywall cleanly, install a toilet, replace a ceiling fan, and spot water damage before it became expensive. More importantly, he was learning discipline. He did not buy a property because he liked it. He bought it because the numbers made sense. By 28, Ethan owned 7 rental units. By 30, he had turned his small operation into a real investment business. It was not flashy. There were no luxury cars, no designer suits, no fake online image of overnight wealth. Most days still involved dirty boots, early mornings, contractor calls, tenant issues, and spreadsheets. But the business was steady, honest, and growing. Ethan treated tenants with respect. He answered maintenance requests quickly. He kept his properties clean and safe. People talked, and before long, good tenants were recommending his rentals to other good tenants. Grandpa Samuel watched all of it with quiet pride. He never made big speeches, but sometimes Ethan caught him standing in the doorway of a finished property smiling like he was seeing more than fresh paint and new floors. He was seeing a boy who had once been erased become a man who could not be ignored. Then Samuel got sick. The diagnosis came on a cold Tuesday morning after weeks of pain he had tried to dismiss as old age. Cancer. Stage 3. The doctor talked about treatment plans, options, percentages, and timelines, but Samuel listened with the calm expression of a man who had already made peace with many things. He chose limited treatment. He said he wanted time with a clear mind more than extra months trapped in hospital rooms. Ethan hated the decision, but he respected it. He moved back into Samuel's house without hesitation. The same spare room that had once saved him became his room again. Only now he was the one cooking soup, organizing medicine, driving to appointments, and pretending not to notice when Samuel grew weaker. Some nights they watched baseball with the volume low. Other nights they sat on the porch without talking. Ethan had built houses, businesses, and a new identity, but nothing had prepared him for the slow heartbreak of losing the one person who had loved him without conditions. That was when his mother returned. Linda showed up one afternoon while Ethan was at work. She had heard from a distant cousin that Samuel was dying. Samuel answered the door himself, leaning on his cane, thin but still sharp-eyed. Linda came dressed nicely. Holding a casserole dish like that could erase years of cruelty. She said she wanted to see her son. She said family should come together during difficult times. She said old wounds needed healing. Samuel did not let her inside. "You did not come to heal anything," he told her. "You came because you heard Ethan is doing well and because you think grief might make him easier to reach." Linda acted offended, but Samuel had no patience left for performances. He told her Ethan did not want to see her, and if she respected him at all, she would leave. Before going, she placed an envelope on the porch railing. Samuel gave it to Ethan that evening. Ethan read the letter at the kitchen table. It was 3 pages long and somehow contained no real apology. Linda wrote that she had always loved both children equally. She wrote that motherhood was complicated. She wrote that Brooke had struggled more than people understood. She wrote that Ethan had always been strong and maybe she had relied on that strength too much. Every sentence sounded soft, but underneath it was the same old message. Her choices were painful, but not truly her fault. The final paragraph revealed the real reason. Carl's overtime had been cut. Linda and Carl were separating. Brooke had trouble keeping steady work. Bills were piling up. Linda had heard Ethan was successful in real estate. Maybe he could help with a loan. Maybe he could give advice. Family helped family, she wrote. Ethan placed the letter on the table and felt nothing. That surprised him. Years earlier, those words might have torn him open. Now they simply looked small. Samuel read the letter, shook his head, and said, "Some people do not miss you. They miss what they think they can get from you." Ethan folded the letter and threw it away. Samuel died 3 weeks later in his sleep. The funeral was small, just a few old friends, neighbors, Ethan and Carl, who arrived alone, and looked like a man who had finally run out of excuses. Linda and Brooke were not invited. After the service, Carl approached Ethan near the cemetery gate. His face was pale, his eyes wet. "I'm sorry," Carl said, "for all of it, for being weak, for letting your mother decide who mattered, for seeing what was happening and doing nothing." Ethan looked at him for a long moment. The anger he expected was not there, only distance. "You can't fix the past," he said, "but you can stop repeating it." Carl nodded. "I filed for divorce." For the first time in years, Ethan saw something like honesty in his father's face. It was not enough to repair everything. Maybe nothing ever would be, but it was a beginning. After Samuel's death, Ethan inherited the little blue house. Selling it hurt, but he knew Samuel would have wanted the money used wisely. Ethan used the proceeds to buy a small apartment building with 8 units. The renovation took nearly a year and pushed him harder than any project before it, but when it was finished, the building became the foundation of a much larger company. Around that time, Ethan met Natalie Brooks, a real estate attorney handling one of his commercial closings. She was smart, direct, and impossible to impress with empty confidence. She read every contract like it owed her money, and caught 3 legal issues before the meeting was 10 minutes old. Ethan liked her immediately. Over coffee after the closing, he learned she had grown up poor, worked through law school, and trusted actions far more than words. She understood broken families. She understood ambition without arrogance. And most of all, she understood that Ethan was not trying to prove his worth anymore. He was building it. Natalie did not save Ethan. That was one of the reasons he loved her. She never treated him like a broken man who needed rescuing, and she never asked him to pretend his past had not shaped him. She simply stood beside him while he kept building. Their relationship was calm in a way Ethan had never known at home. There were no emotional traps, no silent punishments, no constant competition for attention. If something was wrong, Natalie said it. If something mattered, she showed up. To Ethan, that felt almost impossible at first. Then slowly, it started to feel like peace. They married 2 years after they met in a small ceremony at a converted barn outside town. There were no dramatic family speeches, no performance, no pretending. Just close friends, business partners, a few people who had become family by choice, and Carl, who came alone but looked healthier than Ethan had seen him in years. The divorce from Linda had changed him. He was quieter, humbler, and still carrying regret, but at least he was no longer hiding behind it. At the reception, Carl approached Ethan near the edge of the dance floor. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to hug him, but was afraid he had lost that right. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Samuel would be proud too." Ethan nodded. "Thank you." Carl's mouth trembled slightly. "I know that does not fix anything." "No," Ethan said gently. "But it is still good to hear." That was the closest they came to forgiveness that night. It was not a movie scene. There were no tears that magically washed away 20 years. But it was honest, and honesty was more than Carl had offered for most of Ethan's childhood. Brooke reached out a year later. Ethan almost deleted the message without reading it, but something about the first line made him pause. There were no excuses, no guilt, no request for money. Brooke wrote that she had been working at a family restaurant for 2 years, starting as a hostess before becoming a shift manager. She said it was not glamorous, but it was honest. She said she had finally understood that being admired was not the same as being valuable. Then she apologized. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that demanded forgiveness, just plainly. Ethan showed the message to Natalie. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think people can change," Ethan said. "But I also think real change does not ask for applause." So he waited. 6 months later, Brooke sent another message. This time she included small details of her life. A modest apartment she paid for herself, a savings account, a community college course she had enrolled in and actually finished, a photo of her standing behind the restaurant counter in a black apron smiling without the old pageant polish. Ethan stared at that photo for a long time. She looked tired. She looked real. He finally replied with one sentence, "I'm proud of you for doing the work." Her answer came hours later. "Thank you. I know I don't deserve that, but it means more than you know." They did not become close overnight. They did not pretend the past was harmless. But slowly, they built a distant, careful respect. Years later, Brooke had a son named Owen, and when she told Ethan she had given him Samuel's middle name, Ethan had to sit quietly for a moment before he could respond. Linda, however, never changed. After the divorce, she moved into a small apartment and worked as a receptionist at a dental office. According to relatives, she still told people that her children had abandoned her after all she had done for them. She spoke of Ethan's success as if it were proof of his cruelty. She spoke of Brooke's independence as if it were betrayal. Linda had lost control of the story, so she clung to victimhood because it was the only role she knew how to play. By 37, Ethan owned properties across several counties and had expanded into small commercial buildings. But the money mattered less than what it allowed him to do. One afternoon, he drove past an abandoned warehouse in the old neighborhood where Samuel had lived. The windows were boarded. The brick was weathered. Weeds pushed through cracks in the pavement. Most people saw decay. Ethan saw Samuel's voice in his mind, "Broken things can be rebuilt." He bought the building and spent months turning it into a community center. Natalie helped with the legal structure and nonprofit paperwork. Ethan handled contractors, permits, budgets, and the endless problems that came with bringing an old building back to life. They kept the exposed brick and timber beams, but added a computer lab, tutoring rooms, a job training space, and a small affordable cafe where families could buy a hot meal for $1. Natalie believed free food could sometimes make people feel ashamed, but $1 meal let them keep their dignity. They named it the Samuel House. On opening day, more than 200 people came. Teachers, neighbors, city officials, tenants, old friends, young parents, kids chasing one another between folding chairs. Carl came with a woman named Claire who treated him like a person instead of a servant. Brooke came with Owen holding his small hand tightly. Natalie stood beside Ethan near the front of the room, their 2 children leaning against her legs. When Ethan gave his speech, he did not mention revenge. Not the way people expected. He talked about Samuel. He talked about the difference between being born into a family and building one. He talked about how some people tried to make others feel small because another person's light exposed their darkness. Then he said, "For years, I thought the best revenge would be success. I thought one day I would become rich enough, strong enough, important enough, and the people who ignored me would finally regret it. But I was wrong. The best revenge is not making them sorry. The best revenge is becoming so whole that their opinion no longer decides who you are." The room went silent. Ethan looked at Carl, who had tears in his eyes. He looked at Brooke, who held Owen a little closer. He looked at Natalie and their children, the life he had chosen, the people who had chosen him back. "My family canceled my birthday because they thought my existence could wait," Ethan continued. "But leaving that house taught me something. You do not have to keep standing in places where people only notice you when they need someone to blame. Sometimes the door you walk out of becomes the first door to your real life. That night, after everyone left, Ethan and Natalie stayed behind to lock up. The building was quiet, but it did not feel empty. It felt ready. Ready for kids who needed help with homework. Ready for parents who needed job training. Ready for people who needed someone to believe they were more than their worst day. Natalie slipped her hand into Ethan's and smiled. Samuel would have loved this. Ethan looked around the room at the fresh paint, the warm lights, the tables waiting for families, and felt a peace deeper than victory. Years ago, he had walked out of his parents' house with 2 duffel bags, $500, and a heart full of silence. He had thought he was losing a family. Now he understood the truth. He had been making room for one.